So welcome to those of you in the room, and we're letting people log in. Hello, everybody out in uh, online land. I don't know. There's got to be a name for it. Cyberspace. We will get started in 1 minute here. We were just announcing in the room, by the way, if you're not here in person, we're going to have um, some interactive, our regular interactive component at the end of the meeting, but also just note that we have some special guests today, including Jordan Berryhill from MetaMetrics, who's in the back of the room, but a lot of his resources will be available online and he's going to do a presentation too. So, but you won't get any of his swag. So sorry, you got to be here to get the swag. All right, so I think we are good to go. We'll get started. And this quick introductions. I'm Evan Bartelheim. I'm the project director for accountability and data literacy. I am joined by my team here, Dr. Hillary Weissman, and in the back I've got Karina Nahara, and Roy is somewhere. He's our data guy. We also have our amazing assessment unit, our colleagues, Stephen Bartlett and Sarah Nitsos, and they'll be presenting later this morning. And just wanted to go over some quick protocols, some housekeeping. So it is a hybrid meeting. The majority of people are online, but we have a pretty big group in person as well. So if you're online, just make sure you're muted. You come in muted, stay that way. Just it's kind of big and unwieldy if someone starts talking. But please do use the chat feature to ask questions, and we'll make sure that someone's always monitoring the chat, and we will repeat any questions that come in on the chat for people in the room to hear. Also, if you're in person, please raise your hand so we can get you a mic so that people online can hear your question as well. And you may have some questions today. And then anything that we do record as a question that comes in the chat, we always make sure to include that in our follow-up communication. So we capture all of the questions as they roll in. Anything that comes in afterwards, even if you have a question that you're like dawns on you after the meeting concludes, please email us and we'll add that because everybody benefits, I think, from hearing the most common questions that arise. We are always encouraging people to join our group to look at it as a network. And it's great to see there's some people in the room now who I haven't seen in person for a while. So it's always good to see folks in person. And the goal is really that we'll be able to share information from the state, to be very purposeful about that. We use an inquiry-based mindset and a think tank mindset because we do like to problem solve. And I think our colleagues who do the Wednesdays at 1, it's another aspect of DAAN. It's like a great opportunity for people to share what they're doing locally, what kind of practices they're finding useful. And so we want to take that same mindset and expand it to everybody. And we do really emphasize trust, and there's no silly questions. And we know we have the start of a new year. We always have a lot of new people. And so please believe me, we were all new at one point in this role, and there's a lot of information, between the accountability, the assessment, and the data that flows between those two systems. There's a lot to know, and it's constantly changing. So please ask any questions, and we'll try to help answer them here, but also to put you in touch with folks who are nearby who can help support you. All our meeting materials are uploaded on Canvas, including links to pretty much everything we'll talk about, maybe even some resources we won't talk about, but we think are useful. We are going to be pressed for time. There's a lot of stuff that happened since our last meeting in May. And so we may skim over stuff, but we have also a September meeting. But there may be things that are in the Canvas page that will be useful. So make sure you take a look at our Canvas page. And it should be in the email that went out, or if you're in person, you can check that email and bring that up. So all the information is current as of yesterday. We literally were emailing CDE to ask specific stuff because there's a lot of kind of uncertainties because there's been some seismic shifts, and particularly around the state accountability system that happened over the summer. But everything's current. It could change. It happens. But please, yes, use the chat feature and submit questions afterwards, and we'll answer those live if we can. And if not, we'll answer them in the DAAN follow-up Q&A, which we send out within a week. Here are our meetings for the year. We have a space for all those meetings, which is lovely. So we will have the in-person meeting, and we do encourage you, if you can make it, to at least try to make it one time to meet some of the people who are your level of likes in this role. And you can see we have our next meeting on September 29th. We have kind of a big break. And we had a little bit of a conflict with space that we were hoping to get something closer to the release of the dashboard. So maybe look for some drop-ins in the Wednesdays at 1 or something to talk about the dashboard. We'll let you know, or some real quick office hours, because the dashboard is going to come out on October 15th. along with all the state assessment results. And we'll talk about that today. That's a lot coming out at once, and we have a kind of a big gap between meetings there. So in the chat, this is the time of year when you're brand new, right? Or in the chat or with your neighbor. What's something, if you could give one piece of advice that you wish someone had given you when you first started working in the assessment or accountability or both role? What do you wish that advice had been? And if you're brand new, just soak up all that knowledge probably flowing in. So give a couple minutes for the folks in the room. If you're online, give us some thought.
On film in the chat, Evan, and there's a lot of sentiment for joining a community. Okay, specifically like Wednesdays at 1.
All right. Well, I know we're having a lot of good conversations in person as well. All the more reason to come in when you can. But Hillary, go ahead and share some of the chat entries.
So some of the entries that I see in the chat going around here, to start us off was really good. Stay strong, you'll learn it. Quickly followed up with ask questions. Don't feel like you need to know everything all at once. It takes time and things will change, which is very, very true. Asking questions seems to be an overall theme, along with finding a network like Wednesdays at 1 or DAAN, making sure you get out of your silo and you connect with people. So many nuances. Make sure that have things written down. You have resources, and if not, join DAAN or Wednesdays at 1 to help you out. And the learning never ends.
Yeah. How about in the room? If you mind running this around, does anybody any good takeaways or insights that somebody shared that you want to share out? We have probably some cumulative experience in here over 100 years, I would guess.
Don't be scared to ask the questions or volunteer.
All right, we got somebody. We got one person.
Good morning. One thing we spoke about at our table was having a resource, whether it be a spreadsheet or a Google Doc with a list of like resources or people to contact. I shared about like an at a glance document, so you kind of get a sense of what your overall year is instead of focusing and worrying just about in the moment, and kind of like zooming out to get a better look at things. That was one thing we talked about.
That's great. Anna, thanks for bringing that up. Actually, it's something we've been talking about. We did it a couple of years ago where we made available people who wanted to share their contact information in DAAN. And it's tough because we didn't want to put people's stuff publicly out there for privacy considerations, but we'll work on that this year to be able to share, if you're willing to share yourself as a contact, to do that. So we'll let you know how we'll work that. So here's just the agenda for this morning. We'll do some accountability updates to kick things off. We don't really have data updates per se, just a couple things that I think are new or happened over the summer, and something coming up that I would really encourage people to join. Then we have our first special guest. We have our team from LACOE Special Education Unit, and they have some really interesting data around students with disabilities that I think is really important for people to understand, both from the perspective of understanding your own district data and seeing some significant changes in the disability types that are happening across the state, as well as the implications for assessment. Then we have some assessment updates. Our assessment unit will bring up there. And then we'll bring up our colleague Jordan Berryhill from MetaMetrics to talk about some of the resources they have, and I think they're looking for some districts to partner with them as well for some upcoming pilots or activities, right, Jordan? And then we will take another break then, and the online folks can go about the rest of your day. If you're in person, we encourage you to stay so what we're going to do is actually extend the data dive that Matt from our special education team is going to share with you, and actually do it and talk about what the implications are, what you see in your own district. I was frankly really surprised. I looked at my last district's data, and I was like, wow, a significant spike. And these are things that have significant implications for assessment, but also just understanding, if you're standing in front of a board and you get a question, what does this data mean? It'd be helpful to understand what it is. So we're going to dive into it in person so you can actually solidify your understanding. All right, so let's get into some accountability updates. This was a wild summer. There was a deadline of July 15th for the state board to amend, to modify the requirements for differentiated assistance eligibility. And it came with, there was a lot of wrangling with the state legislature and the governor as well. And they basically radically changed everything. And so what came out of it was the change to LCFF state support for LEAs. That includes districts and charters and county offices. And so that's like DA basically, but a shift there. New criteria for eligibility, a new timeline for eligibility that's extended from the 1 year of eligibility support to actually 3 years for those districts identified for DA, and then the revised length of support, and then a new prioritized universal support. And I'll talk about universal support. There's this kind of little support, extra support level where it'll be basically elevate your profile. So it'll be reaching out more. And then on the ESSA side, the school support side, so your TSI, ATSI, and CSI. This is the beginning of another 3-year cohort for ESSA. So this will be the year that we go back. If you remember the last 2 years, we've only identified schools for TSI. This will be the year that schools are identified for CSI and ATSI. And then in addition, there was tucked away in a corner of the state ESSA plan, this little indicator that said, if a school enters the 4th year of CSI without exiting, then that school, if it's a charter school, or the district that that school belongs to, will enter into differentiated assistance. So there's a number of our districts who will be entered in DA because of that, and I'll talk about how that will work. But this is the kind of the big sea change that affects largely county offices, but in turn it'll affect all of you, is that they've basically, the funding model has shifted for county offices now, where the significant amount of our effort will now go into providing universal support for all LEAs, right? And that's to build the capacity of LEAs to serve the needs of their students. And the best part about it is all the things that fall under this will come at no cost to districts, right? So professional development, networks like this one, ongoing workshops, ongoing series, communities of practice, all of those things which may in the past have been really targeted towards those districts which qualified only for differentiated assistance will now be available to all districts as free of charge, right? And so that's the focus the state has taken. So universal supports for all. And then for those districts that do meet the criteria for eligibility for differentiated assistance, there will be additional assistance above that. That's like level 2. And there are going to be far fewer districts eligible for differentiated assistance. We'll talk about how the eligibility has changed and what the implications are there. And then there's still level 3, which is the support intensive intervention direct technical assistance, in which we typically work with those districts. And we have a handful of districts around LA County who meet that criteria, and we work with them in conjunction with the CCEE, the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, to provide them additional resources. Then on occasion, they get the districts that roll up into that highest level of support, the state level intervention. And I don't think we have had anything like that for several years here. So the big change in terms of the support criteria. So what's changed? This is the state board approved this on July 8th. I went up to the meeting. We were very interested in the way they were identifying districts for eligibility, and how restrictive the requirements were in some ways, or maybe, we were advocating for one set of rules, but the rules changed basically for how you're identified. And we'll talk very specifically about what they look like now. But what is good is that they are the same rules for all LEA types. So whether you're a charter school or a district or a county office, you have the same rules applied. And it used to be different. Charter schools, they looked at 2 years of data. If you're a district, they looked at 1 year worth of data, right? So it's very different. What is also different is that the criteria they're looking at are spread over 3 years, right? So they're looking at 3 years worth of data to determine eligibility. So it's not just we used to call it whack-a-mole, right? So like, 1 year we have some bad data. In particular, we had chronic absenteeism spike 1 year and everybody's in DA. And then a year later, everybody's out, right? So this is looking at consistent patterns that apply over 3 years. In addition, that eligibility, the support will shift to a 3-year support period for those districts. So it won't be just, okay, you're identified for DA eligibility and we give you 1 year support, or then it extended to 2. Now it'll be up to 3 for charters and for districts. So you'll be working, and it's consistent with the LCAP process. So the idea is that the state wanted to be more of a partnership that lasted over a significant amount of time, long enough to actually see the changes appear on the dashboard. Then a big shift is in terms of the eligibility is, historically we've used the priority areas. So you had student achievement, priority 4. You had a student engagement, which is looking at chronic absenteeism, graduation rate. You had school climate, which is suspension. They put aside those things, and now they're looking specifically at the indicator level. So 2 red indicators would be in 1 year for a student group would be the preliminary kind of, oh, we may have some problems here, but then extend it to 3 years. And we'll talk specifically about what that is. And then a couple things were removed. So the local indicators have been part of the process. Frankly, they never really had much impact. So local indicators, I don't want to say they're unimportant. They're very important. They still get completed and they're accurate, but they will not have any impact on eligibility for differentiated assistance. So they just need to be approved and uploaded on time. And then CalPADS was being discussed. If your submission for CalPADS was late, that was going to require a differentiated assistance process for 1 year. That was removed. We will still provide support. And if you're part of my CalPADS network, this is kind of still going to be part of our ongoing work. But it's not going to be called differentiated assistance. It'll be 1 year of technical assistance if you miss a deadline or there's data quality issues. And then finally, and this is kind of interesting, the addition of an all-student group in addition to the 14 student groups that exist. So, everybody has all students, right? So that's your highest level at the school or highest level at the district. The thinking was that there are some districts that had so few student groups that they never qualified, and that if we used all students, that we would capture more. And this is probably the truth at schools as well. So all students, if you meet the criteria for all students, this will be a factor as well. And this is only for state support. This is not, don't confuse this with ESSA, right? This is only for DA criteria. That was a lot. Are there any questions in there? Okay, that's great. Any questions in the room? Okay. And this is going to be ongoing. I'm sure we'll revisit this, and the questions will come when all of a sudden you're like, wait, why am I eligible for differentiated assistance? So here's the new DA eligibility criteria. And this is one where you could start looking backwards right now and figure out, ooh, am I at risk? Are we at risk of, and I wouldn't say be at risk because it's a status. You're eligible for additional support. It's not like a sentence or anything. So if you have 2 red state indicators where the same 2 or more, you could have more than 2, where the same indicators are red for 3 consecutive years. So this will be the 24, 25, and 26 dashboards for the same student group in all 3 years, right? So it's very restrictive. So it's same indicators are red for all 3 years, and it's for the same student group. And surprisingly or not surprisingly, that's hard to reach, and it actually reduces the number of districts that will be eligible each year by a substantial amount. So you can now look back. If you look back at your 24 and 25 dashboards, you could see, do I have any student group that had 2 reds for each of the last 2 years, and they were the same 2 reds? Then potentially you might get identified for differentiated assistance if the 26 dashboard includes the same 2 reds for the same student groups. We did a bunch of modeling around this, and the reality is it's not going to be very common to meet it this way, because there's just always that little fluctuation. You move up to orange 1 year, and that group is no longer in consideration. Additionally, the English learner and long-term English learner student group, they made a slight exception here that for the LP, an orange would count as red also, right? So this was actually the case last year where the LP was modified for LTELs. Now it applies to both English learners and LTELs. And one other thing I didn't put here, but this is a question that'll come up. Hey, last year, didn't they exclude ELA and math from consideration for LTELs? They did, but that is no longer the case, at least for now. The state board would have had to have approved that. That was a 1-year modification. So ELA and math are indicators that will be used for LTEL student group. And just in our modeling, right now we're looking at a lot of districts where that is a very likely student group to make a district eligible, because by definition, LTELs are moving out the kids who are, you're reclassifying the students who are highest performing. So you're kind of pulling students out of that student group. It's kind of a unique student group in that way. I think maybe looking forward, the state will probably do something similar in future years, but this identification for DA or targeted assistance, targeted support will be made for a 3-year period this year, and then it won't be reset. So if you're identified for long-term English learners this year, expect that you'll be, they won't fix it in time you won't be removed from the support list. So here's a little test, and I don't know if you can see it in the room, but here's a district. Yeah, everybody's putting their glasses on now. This is the 3 years. So in 3 columns, you got 24, 25, and 26, and these are your all student and then some of your student groups. And they had reds and or oranges if they're English learners. Do we have any, would they be eligible for any of the student groups based on the 3 years here? Take a look. Based on the criteria, 2 red indicators have to be the same for all 3 years for a student group or for EL, LTEL. All right, here one answer in the room. Okay, what's in the chat?
We just posed the question to the chat. So far, we have LTEL.
Okay.
What about the English learner student group? They have ELA and math for 2024, then ELA for 2025, but 2026 is math. But ELA and math does it have to be both red, or can one or the other be red?
It has to be both. Yeah, and so that's a great question, Anjanette, because historically we've looked at ELA and math as a pair, operating as a pair. Now they're separate indicators, right? So you would have to have had ELA and math for all 3 years. Okay, but that is a good question. So now they operate as distinct indicators. We heard LTELs. LTELs, yes. LTELs would meet it here because they have the LP for all 3 years, including 1 year it's orange, right? Even though they improved 1 year, it stayed orange. And then they have math for all 3 years. So this would be an example of a district that would be identified. They'd be identified for the LTEL student group. And the others just kind of wild cards. I will point out, and we don't.
I know we have a large group online here who's saying foster youth.
In the room as well. Foster youth has been
I know.
echoed.
I had to put in some.
Students with disabilities, CCI, all 3 years.
Well, but you have to have the same 2. That's the thing. One indicator the same all the way through. This is where it got really too restrictive. We thought the model was too restrictive, but yes, you got suspension all 3 years, but chronic absenteeism is only there for 1 year, math for 2. So you don't end up with the same 2 indicators for all 3 years. It has to be the same 2 indicators for all 3 years are red. And let me point out one other trick part of the question, which is science got thrown in there, right? And so does science count? Well, science, and we'll talk about science more in just a minute, but science can't count because we'll only have 2 years of full indicator status. So in 24, when it debuted, it didn't have any color attached to it because it was just for informational purposes. And last year they debuted the colors. So you couldn't, by definition, you couldn't have science included for 3 consecutive years. But so you could go back and look, yeah. So his question was about college career indicator and the recalculation that took place because of the change in the rules. The color is all that matters. So if the previous year was red under the existing rules, then it would still be red, and then the recalculated, if it moved up to orange, it's still whatever that year was. So they only apply the rules that were in effect in the year that it occurred. And that's why they recalculate it. So you're not comparing the prior year's number, you're using the same rules from year to year to make sure that the change isn't a result just of the change in the business rules. So
We have another question.
yeah.
Evan, I know it's not on this chart, but in last week's meeting, they mentioned growth data being used for DA. Did I misunderstand that?
Growth data and science data will be available. They'll be incorporated in the differentiated assistance in the 2029 cycle. And they're considering how they might be using them in the ESSA cycle, because you'll have those interim years. So they're considering how they might use those two, but kind of for the same reason. They won't have had 3 years. They couldn't use it. And of course, growth has implications for everybody, but in particular for charter schools. So a lot of people are very interested in, well, what is the significance there? But they can't really be incorporated yet because there's not going to be 3 years of data yet. They changed it. That was the thing. They changed it. It was there are 3 performance levels and no colors. So last year was the first time they had the 5 performance levels and the 5 colors. And I don't know how it would fit in because they'd have to address like magenta. The colors are very different, right? So anyway, but those are all being considered. And these are the kinds of questions I've been posing to the AMARD division, and they just are getting very tired of my emails. I can tell already, but these are great questions, and there's a lot of wondering, and I think it'll be addressed as we move forward and get closer to the dashboard release.
Any idea when this information will be released?
Well, the October 15th, and we'll talk. Yeah, in terms of who's the eligibility, we're going to go over the release, the dual release, and when we'll expect the timeline for all this stuff. But yeah, you'll get the first, and I'll say you'll get a targeted the differentiated assistance or targeted support list will come out initially on October 15th, the same release date as the dashboard, but then it'll be modified in December because of something I'll talk about here momentarily.
Just to clarify, this is only looked at a district level. It's not going to be looked at this criteria at a school level.
Unless you're a charter school.
Unless it's, okay.
Yeah, but this is strictly for districts and charters, LEA level. Yeah.
Evan, we have also one point of clarification for the Zoom group. Okay. So is LTEL the only one? What is the actual answer?
LTEL is the only student group for which this theoretical district would be eligible. Yeah, there are a lot of reds here. And I will say this is the concern, and I'll explain something momentarily. This is a concern that actually the legislature had, was that you can have, because the criteria for eligibility was so tight, you could have a district that had a ton of reds that wouldn't be eligible, and they were concerned that there wouldn't be enough support for those districts. And so they added this additional level of support that's called prioritized universal support. So remember I mentioned universal support? Every year the district or the state will publish a list of the priority universal support, and those districts and charters will receive extra outreach. They'll be targeted for outreach by the county offices. So if you meet the criteria for 1 year for any student group, you'll be hearing from us basically. We think you should join this network because we see you're not just going to be left on your own for 3 years. And that's what the idea behind priority universal support. You'll still be directed towards kind of the universal support offerings, but it'll just be through outreach. You're not obligated to participate in any of those things. So there is one thing that remains the same, which is it's still based on student groups, right? So it's still a matter of student groups with the addition of the all student group. And that level 3, that direct technical assistance, they didn't change the criteria there. And I'll be honest, when they looked at, this was one of the complaints we had. We said, your new eligibility is so tight that some of our districts, which had previously been identified for this highest level of support, direct technical assistance, those districts are no longer meeting the criteria for DA. So how do you address that discrepancy? And that was where the legislature was also concerned. So they said, for now, the direct technical assistance criteria is going to remain the same. So any district, they'll use the priority areas. So it's kind of like 2 different rules are being applied. For the direct technical assistance was various, like 3 out of 4 years and very involved, and we've done some modeling of that too. It'd still be a small group of districts, but some districts that we were already supporting at that level will probably remain there, and probably also would be eligible for differentiated assistance. So we also are starting this new 3-year cycle for ESSA. So this is the school level support. And so the first thing, they're going to evaluate the eligibility for exiting CSI and ATSI. So those districts were identified because that's a 3-year cycle. The exit criteria will be evaluated. And then they'll determine who meets the criteria now for CSI and ATSI for the next 3-year period, which of course has implications for the Williams audits, things like that. But also then additional support for CSI, you get money. So that's another factor that goes into it. And then there's a new phase of support, and I'll talk about that. It actually is differentiated assistance. Like I mentioned, there was a clause in our ESSA plan that said 4 years of CSI and the district moves into DA, or the charter school would move into DA. So the determinations are around the 2 areas. CSI is both low graduation rate and then low performing school level performance of Title I schools. And that's where they apply those wacky rules where there are 5 indicators, the majority of which are red, right? Or there's all indicators are red except 1. And so you could have a school that only has 2 indicators, right? And you can end up there with 1 red, 1 blue, but you qualify. So those are the factors that go into CSI. The big one that's going to have an impact, and I see some districts in the room that I know this will impact, is we have a lot of schools that have low grad rate by default because that's their model, that's their operating model. So they have continuation schools. In a lot of districts, you'll push the students at a continuation school back to the comprehensive high school when they catch up with their grades. And so it's really tough to get the graduation rate above 68%, which is the threshold for low grad rate. That's the federal threshold. So that's going to be a factor probably more than anything else. We have a few low performing schools, the Title I schools in the county, but not many. I think just a handful. And they definitely often will improve enough that they'll move out of that list this year. And then the ATSI, and this is the student group level performance. CSI low performing is all students. The ATSI is the student group level performance, very similar to ATSI, and so we'll look at that. But these are the same rules that applied before. Again, it's a combination of indicators. Depending on how many indicators you have, it would be, all indicators are red, or the majority of indicators are red, or all indicators are red but 1. So this is what we're talking about. If your school does not exit CSI within 4 years, the district, or if you're a charter school, you would become eligible for differentiated assistance. And we know that there are, and this was one of the reasons why the state chose a more restrictive eligibility, because statewide there are 168 LEAs who are sitting in this. They were at 3 or 4 years, and they knew that this year we're likely to move into this category of differentiated assistance. So if you want to know if you're at risk of this, and we linked it here, last year's ESSA assistance file has a column that says you were eligible, for 3 years or 4 years as of last year. Then you'll know if the school meets the eligibility again, then you would move into differentiated assistance. And our modeling shows that we'll have probably as many districts that are eligible for DA for this reason as there are for meeting the criteria that I talked about earlier. So it's not going to be treated any differently. It's still the differentiated assistance process will be based on needs. And in many cases, the needs will be specific to a school that hasn't met graduation rate. But you'll be eligible for the additional support that is provided through DA. So before we transition, let me just check if there are any questions in the chat.
No, the only real question in the chat was a very logical one, which was asking, is there a 1-page Cliff Note, cheat sheet, visualization, infographic of this information?
I haven't seen one yet. I know county superintendents have been working. I've been working on some of the language around that. Yeah, it's a lot, but look for some simplified language to come out, and we'll check. There may be some stuff that's already out there that the state has produced as well. But yeah, all this happened in July, and then it's just kind of been a mad rush to get some support documentation. All right, so we're going to have a little quiz or turn to someone in the room because we're going to shift gears here. But yeah, go ahead and launch the poll, Karina. And if you're in the room, we're just going to rely on turning to a partner. But just on a scale of 1 to 5. Oops, that's right in the way. So let me pull it over. How confident do you feel explaining the California Schools dashboard to someone else? And again, no shame here. Everybody's at different levels. So one is not that confident. I'm brand new to this. While score 5, I'm extremely confident. I could explain this to a teacher standing on my head. And while that's going on, yeah, take a minute at your table to talk to how strongly you feel. So a plurality, right? Plurality, 43%. We have no majority, but plurality is at a 3. So that's pretty good. In terms of being able to share. How about in the room? What do we sense? Is it 3 to 5? What's the? Yeah, put your fingers up. What is it like? Okay, 4s and 5s. Okay.
I gave himself a 6. So.
All right.
Tony gave himself a 6, everyone.
All right.
Done,
This
Tony.
next section, if you'd like, you can come on up here.
All right.
The knowledge.
That's great. So there have been a lot of changes. This is the thing we talked about. It's always changing. There are way more changes again this year. Those are the share results. And so Hillary's going to dive in and talk about the changes that are will be changing the dashboard, and then we'll lead to, again, some recalculations here this year. But go ahead and take over.
It's not going to be quite as heavy as Evan's presentation, and most of this information is a reiteration of our May DAAN's meeting. But nonetheless, some updates that you can take back. And just a note that there are flyers and items linked in the presentation that are also linked in Canvas for you to use. So to start us off is everyone's favorite. Is this the alignment between the dashboard and the assessment, the data release, which is going to begin a new tradition from here on out of being released on October 15th. Except if you're a LEA coordinator, we'll get to that. You'll have another day to be able to see that information before it comes out. But really the key with this statewide information, all available all at once, is that those combined results can be used in conjunction with your local data to help support program shifts and changes in a sooner fashion. Additionally, if you're like us, the communication to different audiences at different times when you're talking about the dashboard, albeit academic indicator, maybe student growth versus CASP, these can be cumbersome. They're very confusing and sometimes misleading. And this gives an opportunity now to streamline those communications so that everything is a little bit more targeted and unified. And additionally, you can start your planning, albeit not maybe as ideal as we'd like, but still earlier in the game. So that's going to be nice. And here on out, you'll expect that. As I mentioned before, this is going to look like a public release on October 15th in which the dashboard, including statewide results and the LCFF differentiated assistance files, will be out to the public. I don't want to hold my breath, but Kim did say it was coming out at 10 a.m. We'll see if the website does not crash, but that's the idea. However, as I said before, if you're a LEA or school, you get to preview the dashboard. The coordinators will have access to that and the data files for all statewide indicators as well 1 day in advance. Keep in mind, you're not going to get the growth for ELA or math. Remember, that takes quite a few weeks to render that data, and that will come out in a subsequent supplemental release, which is our next slide here. And if you remember, the accountability has basically a two-part accountability data release. First part's going to be the dashboard that we just spoke about. This second part, the supplemental release, is going to be on December 15th. And as you can see, it has a whole host of information, one of which are those additional reports that everyone loves in those downloadable data files. As I said, the growth data will be out, which I know is very exciting for a lot of our charter people. Federal support determinations are going to come out. The re-release of differentiated assistance files and method 5, as Evan said before, those schools that have not, that are CSI, that have not exited within 4th year, you'll get that information. If you're in charge of the SARC, way to go, another hat, that file is going to be coming out. And our dashboard alternative school status 1-year graduation rate will be coming out as well. So you may be asking, Hillary, where do I find all this amazing stuff? Thank you for asking. Okay. In a very creative naming reference here, the CDE has a aligned dashboard and assessment data website. On this website here, you can get an update, things that you can use with regards to timelines, organization of key data files that are coming out, correspondence that's already been sent out to superintendents and LEAs about this aligned release. Most importantly is that frequently asked questions section. I gave you a little screen capture of the PDF, the flyer there, but I noticed those questions are being updated routinely. So feel free, that's one of the already out, you can check. It's been there since May. And that information is kind of just accessible and ready for you and kind of being updated until May 15th. Dashboard communication toolkit. What would it be without a little plug for a toolkit that is not yet out, but as we all know, it is going to be robust and we'll bring more information to you when it is released. but keep your eyes open because this year I imagine that the materials will be ever useful for governing groups at school sites. Anyone who's a new principal or leader onboarding with those on-demand indicator videos, the technical guides, which most of this room and online Zoom will like to geek out to, will be updated. You will also have the FAQs and other resources, especially the parent flyers. Those come in a bunch of different languages and can support, like I said, communication with your parents. I think we have question 2 here. And is Karina going to launch this poll? And as you can see, which of the releases are you anticipating? Do you anticipate receiving the most interest within your LEA on October 15th? So of those that are listed, rank each of them as 1 from little to no interest, to 2, some interest, or 3, significant interest. We're just trying to gauge of the California statewide assessment results, of the dashboard or LCFF differentiated assistance, which is your district most interested in seeing first?
All right, so online for California state assessments, for first little interest, it's only 6 people. For some interest, it's 21. For significant interest, it's 54% of the crew. When we get down to the dashboard, the most interest, we've got 46% of the people say this is the most interesting one, 31% say it's kind of interesting, and 24% say it's the number one, or the number 1, which is little or no interest. Finally, the LCFF differentiated assistance files, 36% of the people say this is the top, 32% of the people say it's the middle, and 32% of the people say it's the bottom. So this one's kind of a split. So it's a pretty runaway case for the state testing, for the statewide assessment results to be number 1. That's on our Zoom.
All righty, thank you to the Zoom participants for getting us some information there. We ask this question frequently when we're presenting to other groups, and it's kind of split as well. Depends on which side of the house, I guess, you are working for. But I beg to say that our assessment folks are very antsy and eager, and likewise with our accountability. If you are someone who's fortunate enough to wear both hats, congratulations. Okay. You are just going to be having obscene amount of coffee from now until when it's released. Okay, so let's move on then to some 2026 updates. To kick us off, we're going to do some dashboard updates. I'm going to start with the college career indicator. And as I said, some of this information is a repeat from our May DAAN 2026 meeting with some final additions, modifications, or approval that have taken place. And I'm going to go off of what someone said in the very beginning here is using a sheet to keep it all in mind. When you're thinking of the college career indicator, it is an ever-growing indicator, and although it represents the broad course of study and what you're offering to students, it has become very robust, and it has lots of Klingons and additive pieces that can become confusing. Starting off with new college career measures for 2026, we have Cambridge International, work-based learning, and the state seal of civic engagement. We're also going to talk about International Baccalaureate in Leadership Military Science, but those really have been expanded upon and just updated. They're not necessarily new. So we'll kind of start off with these 3. To touch upon Cambridge International, as you know, this is an extension from Cambridge University. And last time we spoke, I believe, I gave out some information that was around not just the courses they were offering, but the complex way in which those are graded. And although I'm not going to be reviewing that now, you can see on this slide, it's going to be showing you not just the criteria to be prepared, but also the meeting of the UC and CSU requirements, the plus completion of 1 Cambridge level course with a C- or higher. But just to remind you that we look forward to potentially seeing this grow. Right now, this is represents a very small amount of schools, 2 schools total in California, but nonetheless, this has been added. And so we'll keep our eye on that. Work-based learning, okay? When we're looking at work-based learning, there's been some significant updates and approvals by the State Board of Education. When we're looking at the work-based learning measures, we have internships, student-led enterprise, and simulated work-based learning. So to give you some definitions so you can kind of wrap your head around them because they each are kind of unique in their own way. The internship involves a supervised workplace experience connected to a school program or course. And to count towards CCNI preparedness, students must complete at least 50 hours in a workplace setting and receive a rating of meets or exceeds expectations on an employer evaluation. A student-led enterprise now involves students operating a school-based entrepreneurial business that's connected to a course and a program. And likewise, these students have to complete 50 hours outside of class time. And finally, we have simulated work-based learning, and it allows students to really participate in these real-world job skills in a school-based environment. And students need to complete, again, at least 50 hours either during or outside of this class time. And the key takeaway here is that these new measures really expand the opportunity for our students to demonstrate college and career readiness while maintaining consistent expectations and like meaningful participation. I think aside from the definitions and the link that we've provided for you, one of the things that we wanted to elevate was during last week's AAIM meeting in which a question was asked. It says, do the hours of work-based learning measures aggregate across 4 years, or must a student fulfill all those hours in one school year? I'm going to pose that to you guys for just a minute, and I have my eyes or my timer on. And if you're in the Zoom, feel free to drop an answer. And if you're in person, feel free to shout it out. So the answer was a student must fulfill all the hours of a work-based learning experience within one school year. The hours don't accumulate across multiple years. The required hours must be completed during a single school year and for the measure to count towards the college career indicator preparedness. And this was new to me and good for me to understand. If you do have questions around it, feel free to drop them in. There were a lot of components with work-based learning, and so we're always looking to add those to any of our Q&As as well. And if you are looking at the chart right here, this basically is the work-based learning plus measurement that's going to demonstrate, we'll show you the following plus measures that can be combined with high-quality work-based learning for a school or an LA to show it's prepared for they've prepared their graduates for college and career. And although I may not read them all, you'll have them there as a reference. And that reference is going to look very similar as we move on to the State Seal of Civic Engagement. And as you recall, in May, when we spoke about this, I gave you an overview of when it was established back in 2020, that it recognizes students who've demonstrated excellence in civic education. What you can see on this slide is that these are the plus measures that can be combined for a school or an LA to show that its students are prepared for the CCNI. So it's almost the same as the last slide you saw, but this time you have work-based learning added into it. Now moving on to just some updates that are around indicators that have already been existing. And that's still dealing with International Baccalaureate, which I'm going to call IB for sake of time. So under the 2025 CCNI indicator, students who could demonstrate preparedness by earning a score of 4 or higher on 2 IB exams or by meeting, UC and CSU A through G requirements and earning a score of 4 or higher on 1 IB exam. You can see now for the 2026 measure, it's been expanded to recognize successful course completion. So in addition to the exam performance, students now qualify by, as you can see, completing 2 IB courses with a grade of C- or higher, or through a combination of qualifying IB courses and exams, or meeting CSU and UC requirements, plus an IB course with a C- or higher. And this is when that cheat sheet comes in handy. So the second update to an existing college career indicator measure is our leadership in military science. And as you can see here, under the 2025 CCNI, students were required to complete 2 years of leadership in military science, and earn a level 3 or higher in either ELA or math on the Smarter Balanced assessments, and at least a level 2 in the other subject area. As you can see for the update for 2026, the state board expanded this measure by adding this nice mouthful of Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery Forces Qualification Test, ASVAB, or AFQT, as an additional option. So under the updated measure, students must still complete their 2 years, but now they can demonstrate preparedness in one of two ways. They can earn a qualifying Smarter Balanced score, as mentioned before, or they can earn a 31 or higher on the ASVAB, which represents the 31st percentile. So now this slide in all of its glory are all the CCNI measures. This brings together the full set of approved measures and pathways that can be and that contribute to a student being identified as prepared. I'm hesitant to say, and this is it, because we know that it's ever expanding. But now this gives you a big picture view in a single snapshot. The two links on the bottom here have been updated and do have information, especially the second one, the 2026 College Career Indicator Measures of Readiness. That is a handy 2-page visual that doesn't just explain all of the measures, but it will show you a chart of the criteria needed in order for students to be considered prepared. So I highly recommend that one. So question 3, we're going to launch that in a minute. The question I'm interested in is not necessarily the top 3 that your district or LEA finds students are using, but this question is more about the 3 programs or so your LEA will prioritize to help students, help more students attain CCNI preparedness this year. So we'll launch that, and if you are in, there you go. If you're in the Zoom, you get to vote, and if you're in person, you get to go to an ARM partner and talk about that. We'll give that 30 seconds. So I can see from our online audience, it's advanced placement, correct me if I'm wrong, CTE pathway completion, and college credit courses, which are still to some degree the top 3 choices our students are looking to attain, are areas in which your LA is looking to expand. And maybe at a later point in time, and as we get closer to the release, we can look into a little bit more as to why, or things that may be successful that are helping you to expand. So now as we wrap up the College Career Indicator, new measures and updates, what are you going to see on the 2026 dashboard about these changes? What is that going to look like? And so the first thing that you want to know is that there will be a recalculation, and to ensure that the reporting for 2026 reflects the actual changes rather than just changes to the CCNI methodology, the CDE is going to recalculate the 2025 CCNI using the 2026 criteria. That recalculated 2025 result will serve as the prior year status used to calculate the 2026 change, and it will be included in the 2026 downloadable files. It's important to note, though, that the 2025 dashboard itself will not change. The results on the 2025 dashboard will remain the same, but are going to be used so that we're able to, in 2026, have that 2 years, that comparison ability. So anticipate that's exactly the process that it's going to take to make sure that 2026 we can see what's going on. Okay, and before I turn it over, we'll have a very quick update on the suspension rate indicator. I know we touched upon it last time in May, but as a refresher, with regards to LTELs, we were discussing how LTEL learners are evaluated on this indicator, and there was discussion at the state board and in our May meeting of the approval to adjust this to better reflect LTEL students who are enrolled in elementary schools and districts. And for this reason, and because LTELs have a very unique definition that is has that age-related component, Ed Code 52052 states that a student who has not reached English proficiency within 7 years of first being identified as an English learner, that definition right there is what's being used to to drive the change that you're going to see here so that the 5x5s will better reflect where we see those students, which is typically when they're in middle school at that age range. So you will see that at the school level, LTELs are now, they're going to use the middle school 5x5 color grid tables rather than the elementary school tables. And at the district level, LTELs will use the K through 12 or the unified district 5x5 color grid tables rather than the elementary tables. And this is just a relatively small technical adjustment, but it does help to ensure that the LTEL performance is evaluated using a little bit more appropriate and precise determination. I try to go as quick as possible because I got to hand it back over here to Evan. He's going to walk us through the LP, ELA mathematics, and growth indicator and the science indicator.
Hillary was so amazing. She was answering questions in the chat while she was presenting. I mean, heck. So yes, a couple more updates, then we'll bring up our first special guest. The LP, this is a big change for the LP related to only the LTEL students. And keep in mind, the LTEL students is a state student group. It's not part of the federal ESSA plans. They had some flexibility in doing this because you may go, well, didn't they try this once before where they included reclassification as part of the LP? Well, that was with English learners and the feds rejected that. But since LTELs aren't in the state's ESSA plan, they can do it with LTELs. So basically, they're adding LTELs who were reclassified prior to taking the summative LPAC into the equation as part of the numerator. So if you reclassified a student in October, an LTEL student, that student will then be included in your numerator for the LP. It'll definitely have a positive impact. So that's good to know. Note that if they get so far as to take the summative LPAC later in the spring, they would be included in the regular LPAC. Did they make progress? Did they retain at the highest level? So that's an important change. And again, this is one where they have to go back and recalculate the previous year to make sure that the business rules changing aren't what changes your number for the change. Just quickly on the academic update, I briefly touched on earlier. Science, ELA growth, and math growth were approved as full state indicators. They won't have any impact on differentiated assistance until 2029 because we didn't have 3 years. But they're being evaluated for inclusion in the ESSA determinations, not this year, but next year. So it could be a factor in TSI, targeted support and intervention for school levels, starting next year. So 3 quick data updates. If you're a dashboard coordinator or an alternate authorizer, there was a rollover last week. And you might want to check. We had one district where they're like, nobody's approving these. And that's because the superintendent had changed over the summer and they didn't have new information at CDE yet. So the CDS code has to be changed by someone in your district, and that's available. If you want to know where, shoot me an email. But if you are a dashboard coordinator, an alternate authorizer, or a SARC coordinator, you need to reapply at this point so you'll have access to the dashboard. And be able to upload the LCAP. That's the next function that you would need. But you're also on the cool listserv that you get information, helpful information, and you'll get invited to the accountability mornings. We go to those things and we'll report out, but being a dashboard coordinator is helpful in that regard. And then also the SARC and LCAP e-template, those can be assigned by the main authorizer, alternate authorizer. That may not be you, the dashboard coordinator, but somebody at the site level probably will be the SARC coordinator for each of the schools in your LEA. This reclassification data came out this summer. Everybody's looking for it on DataQuest because isn't that where they always kept it? DataQuest is going to be undergoing a big overhaul this year, so they're only releasing this in data files, and I included the link where to find it. So the initial release this summer was for the 24-25. Look at that, happy people. I know, it's like, how long have we been asking for this? Yes, so I know, for years. So the 25-26 will be released in the fall again as a data file. So it's not going to be on the DataQuest page, but they did put in this great web page that explains the calculation. And I will say, because we have this LCAP metrics inventory where we said, here's how you can generate your own one, but that's no longer valid. You really have to use the official data because they take into account kids who are mobile and change schools multiple times. You just can't see that at your school. You could run the cumulative enrollment and go, oh, we had this English learner, but then that kid might have gone elsewhere. And for the state calculation, that student will be picked up at the last school they attended, and you wouldn't be able to see that locally. So that's an important one to take a look at. Then for those of you who are non-Calpadian speakers, which I think very few of us are Calpadian speakers. We have this amazing roadshow that's going to be rolling through LA County. We worked with CSIS to find 3 dates that would work. So for each of the primary submissions, they're going to come to LA County and do an in-person. They'll be right here in maybe they're across the street. But for the first one on October 30th, this is really primarily targeted towards non-CalPADS experts. It's for the people who will need to review the reports that are submitted. And for this particular one, this is great to attend if you are a state and federal programs person, if you're the fiscal person who's looking at the LCFF numbers, your nutrition people, because they'll say, these are the reports that you need to look at and make sure they're accurate. And so we have limited capacity, but we'll pack everybody in, and we always have a waiting list. So make sure at least you get on the waiting list or refer somebody to it. Your special ed SELPA people might also be interested in this. Friday, October 30th, 8:30 to noon.
We have one question before we move on, Evan,
Okay.
if you don't mind. And it's taking us back. Any further talk about the date that begins the LTEL calculation? TK first enrolled date is 1 year prior to identification and initial LPAC. This will cause over-identification of LTEL in 5 more years.
It is a great question, and it's certainly something we put out there. The CDE has not taken really a stance on that. I think they think it'll work itself out before then. I don't know. But yeah, because you're identified, you're in school, you haven't yet been identified until you're a kindergartner because you're not allowed to take the initial LPAC. And so there is a concern like, well, when we have this flood of long-term English learners and they've kind of kicked the can down the road, I would just say politely, I don't think that they don't think it's going to be a huge problem. So they don't want to get all worried until maybe a year out. And, I think I'll be retired by then. So 5 years out for sure, I'll be retired. All right. So any questions? We do have this, I won't hold this up here long, but I do want to make sure everybody in the room knows the tiny URL or the feedback form. We want to make sure you fill this out. We are really trying to improve our services, and we get a lot of information from you as far as, was this useful for you? Can you change things to make it useful for you? So that said, I want to bring up our good friend, Matt Roper from our special education division, and he's got some great information about data and significant changes demographically. And I'm going to hand it to him.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you. Hi, my name is Matt Roper. I'm a special education coordinator with Los Angeles County Office of Ed. And thanks to the crew over here, they let me have a few minutes to go and talk about some data points with you guys. And I think one of the guiding questions that all of you have been wondering is, how is a gastroenterologist going to change special education forever? And so we'll answer that question before the end of the slide deck. All right, let's go and talk a little bit about some DA and the least restrictive environment before we go into some of the other topics. So back when I was a special education teacher, first year teaching, I went to a presentation on how the least restrictive environment went and affected our student test scores. And so I went and asked the presenter, hey, could you go and give me that particular research article? She gave it to me, and it involved about 5 students total. Well, 5 students, that's not a very large sample. So I was really excited when California Department of Ed was trying to use a little bit larger sample size called the state of California. Okay, so a very big, large sample. And they went and had West Ed go and do this particular study. And what they found out was for every 10% increase in general education for our students with disabilities, there was actually an increase of about 13% for that academic growth. So a really great rise here for our students with disabilities and their academic outcomes. And so I have some other links. There's a great study from Alana, which is a meta-analysis. They have about 500 or so academic peer-reviewed articles in their study if you want to read way too many articles on that particular subject. Now, the inclusion levels weren't just whether or not a student was included, but the length of the school day had a very significant outcome on those improvements. So on this little chart I have here on the right, if you had less than 40% of the day, would use that as our baseline. And then if students were included in gen ed between 40 to 79%, you saw a small but modest increase. However, if students were included 80% or more of the day, there was a really big increase on those test scores. So the LRE, the least restrictive environment, has a huge impact on our students with disabilities. Now, I went and took all of our 80 school districts, made it onto a chart that's way too small and hard to read. And on the left-hand side, you'll have the highest levels of inclusions by districts. And on the right-hand side, it kind of slopes down and you see where districts that have the least amount of inclusion are more on the right. Now, you'll also notice that on the columns that there are some columns that are blue and you have some columns that are red. The red columns are districts that are in differentiated assistance for special education. Now, you can also see on the far left, there's two red columns. The one on the farthest left, that particular district actually increased their LRE by about 12% in a single year. So I would kind of argue that they haven't had a really good opportunity to go and show that benefit or growth for LRE because it's only been there 1 year. So I would argue that that particular data point was an outlier. But as you can see here, we have a lot of districts that have low LRE on the right. And I think we can go and see that there's quite a few districts there that are meeting DA criteria. So something to go and consider at their school districts. All right, let's go and talk about a little bit of the 21st Century Dyslexia Act. And the 21st Century Dyslexia Act is being sponsored by Bill Cassidy, who is a senator from Louisiana. Bill Cassidy isn't just anybody, he is a gastroenterologist. So, which leads back to the original guiding question. So, Bill Cassidy, gastroenterologist, state senator, is doing the 21st Century Dyslexia Act. So he happens to have 3 children. One of them happens to have dyslexia. His wife happens to be a surgeon and also has done peer-reviewed essays with Yale on the topic of dyslexia. And because of that, because of their child who has dyslexia, they actually opened up a charter school that goes and specializes in dyslexia. So he actually is the sponsor of 2 separate bills. I have the 21st Century Dyslexia Act here, but he's also a sponsor of what's called the READ Act, which is promoting the science of reading and trying to do that for a federal law. This one here, though, the 21st Century Dyslexia Act, goes and looks at all the disabilities that we have under the IDEA and is proposing that we go and add dyslexia as a 14th disability. So this is not unprecedented. We've had autism and added on in the early 1990s, as well as traumatic brain injury. So this is not unfounded to go and add another area for eligibility. So let's go and look a little bit at some of the state information here. So under specific learning disability, where dyslexia kind of rides inside of right now, we have, hold on, let me move a little bit, there we go. Specific learning disability is around 31.5% or so of our kids in California are SLD. And so if dyslexia went and became a standalone disability, most of the kids from SLD would probably be popping out and be going and becoming under the eligibility of dyslexia. So how many of our kids that are in SLD are possibly would have the criteria to meet eligibility under dyslexia? Well, the Yale Center estimates somewhere around 20% of the population, or 80 to 90% of all of those with learning disabilities. So if SLD is about 31.5%, somewhere about of 27% or so of all of our students in California might likely go and fall under the dyslexia category. So that would instantaneously make dyslexia as the #1 eligibility category in California, or at least after you start doing all the triennials over the next 3 years or so. All right, let's take a little bit of a look at autism rates for the USA, California, and then boil it down a little bit to LA County. All right, so I've got some graph here. It shows a little bit on SLD. It starts a little bit higher, then kind of plateaus throughout the rest of the years, around 32% or so. Speech kind of hovers around the same. And then autism has been sloping up quite a bit over the last like 25 years or so. Let's go and look a little bit. That was the national data. Let's break this down for California data. So this particular graph was shared at the State Board of Education, and I've got links in the bottom for the last 3 years there. So if you could see, back in 2022-23, we have autism with about 150,000 kids or so, making about 18% of the population for students with disabilities. And then for 2023-24, jumps up to about 170,000, hitting around 20% of students. And then now, more recently, for the 24-25 year, we have about 190,000 students with autism at 21.51%. Now notice that at 21.51%, that we have now beaten out speech, which was traditionally our second largest category for students with disabilities. So autism is now at number 2 for our SWDs. So I have another chart here. This just basically is the same information, but more in a graphical format, showing that really the big increase for students with autism. So let's look a little bit and compare some of these states, though. Now, the Center for Disease Control goes and looks at the number of people, not students, with autism. So normally, right now, we were looking at generally our K-12 population for students with autism, but we're going to switch gears, do a slight apples to oranges comparison. CDC, once again, is looking at all people with autism, so from any age, 0 to 100 years old. So we have some really big differences and discrepancies between states. So for example, Texas, we have about 1 in 103, but CDC reports that in California, we're seeing about 1 in 19. So we're having some pretty massive differences between states. So that's something to consider, that California is fairly high. So things to consider there as well. All right, so let's boil down the data a little bit and look at LA County data. And I pulled out non-charter schools. We'll look at charter schools in a second on the next slide. So back in the good old days of 2022-23, we had about, let's say 35,000 students or so with autism, and then moves up in 23-24 to about 40,000, then 44,000, and then we have about 48,000 or so for 25-26. So when you're looking at that difference there, we're really seeing quite a bit of increase there, about 36% increase over a 3-year period. So pretty big change, if you ask me. Let's go and change this to charter schools and see if we see a difference there as well. So 22-23, we had about 4,200 kids, 4,800, 5,400, and then maybe about 6,000 kids or so. So we're seeing a really large increase in our charter schools, around 44% or so of students with a disability as autism for primary disability, as in number 1 on those IEPs. So it doesn't count for secondary. All right, so we're going to go and take an opportunity to go and use DataQuest to see if we can pull up and show you guys how to go and use DataQuest to pull up those numbers. All right, so you can go to DataQuest. I got a QR code there, or the URL at the bottom, and there's going to be 2 different things that you'd first do. First is select level, and you are likely going to go and select district. And then for subject, you're going to go and select special education data. Then you can go and pick what district you are, and then underneath that, you're going to select a report of SPED enrollment by program setting. Hit that big blue submit button, and you're going to go and get a bunch of data come up, but now you need to go and filter it a little bit. So there's going to be a section called report options and filters, and what you want to do is change the row from race and ethnicity, change that to disability category, and then depending if you're a charter or non-charter, if you're traditional district, you'll probably pick non-charter. If you're charter school district, pick charter, and then view the data as percentages, and then you'll be able to go and find out where you guys are yourselves. And you might need to go through it like 3 or 4 times if you want to go and change the years and then maybe give yourself a little bit of like a time series on where you were 3 or 4 years ago versus today to be able to go and calculate that. So you might end up with something hopefully very similar to this. So just some things to go and consider is that autism for the state average is about 21.5%, and you can go and compare your numbers to the state. In this particular example, we have the number of students here with designation of autism as primary is about 1,800 kids or so. And in this particular district, there's about 7,700 kids. So that works out for this particular district being around 24.3%, which is a little bit higher than the state average of 21.5. And you could go and do this over maybe 3 years or so to see whether or not your district is higher or lower than would be expected. All right, some considerations is what is your district? Are you guys lower or higher? And your thoughts on whether or not you are under that state average and what's the why behind that? And so other guiding questions could be, are you growing faster or slower than expected? And I think the third part is where the implications here is, are your school psychologists, do they have additional training on going and assessing for students with autism? There's a number of diagnostic tools out there. And so some of them, for example, are more relatively new and you might need to go and get upgraded and certified. And your school psychs that have been around a long time may not have access or have been trained on, for example, the ADOS as one of their assessments. This also goes and affects maybe your training for your general education teachers on the accommodations and modifications that students with autism may or may not need, depending on what the individual needs of each kid is. And just some other real quick things. We have a resource guide on inclusion that we've created. And thank you so much.
And for those of you who are in the room, we're going to dive into this and we want to have the conversation with each other. Like the why is, I think, what's so interesting to us. And I think I also, when Matt was proposing what he would talk about, I think one of the things we thought is, I'm going to be the one who's standing in front of my school board, and invariably they're going to say, why is this, what accounts for this growth? Now, maybe your special ed director or coordinator will know the answer to that, but you as the person who's always the front person when it comes to data probably should have an answer as well. So we do have homework. If you're in the room, you're going to dive in, but we have a handout that we would recommend you download and follow the directions to kind of get into the questions that Matt had posed. You know, what does your district look like? Have you seen the same changes statewide, growth in autism, students, percentage of students, and why? And you may want to go do a little investigation. And if you're coming to our next meeting in person, we'll kick off the beginning of the extension activity by reporting out what you may have found. But let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break before our assessment team comes here. And we'll get the clock rolling here with a nice mellow ocean view. Back in 5.
So we'll get a lot of people in the room a second here to get started. It's great to see everybody. And we're going to move on to assessment updates. We have a wealth of things slated today. It was great to hear from special education. We'll work with them in the extension after the end of the Zoom, but we'll get a chance to look at that as well. One of the things you saw Hillary showing us is a survey, and you did a survey on what you're offering if you're at AAIM. Very similar survey you see across the state. Use of AP and Cambridge very low, although a brand new a measure there. In the context of assessment, I want to highlight some of those measures in CCI. In that measure combinations document that dropped in August, that's this month, that include assessment. And all the ones in green here, 21 of those have a primary element that are assessment related. Many of those we know last year in June, 2025, CDE included within the AP element, within the assessment elements for those college-based exams, college credit type exams, a grade. You can complete the course with a grade. That is one of those options in each of those areas. And we know that there's multiple options here. For example, for sealed by literacy, one of those options for demonstrating proficiency in his exam. But as we move into measures that are separate from exams, in the interest of moving away from a doubling up of SBAC as a measure here on CCI, over 50% of the CCI measures do include a assessment of some kind. Most of them, your assessment division might run, or maybe run at your individual high schools. I wanted to point out a couple things though here on the way that those work currently in this description. So when you've got AP, and you do 2 APs to meet CCI, those have to be the same type of test. So even though an IB and a Cambridge and an AP might be an equivalent type of program or test, they currently don't have an interchangeability. We know that sometimes in our larger districts, we have an IB at one school, an AP program at another school. Maybe we have are interested in some of the language courses that are available through Cambridge for our state sealed by literacy to adopt that aren't available through any of the others. They have a wealth of languages. Maybe IB has something that AP doesn't. Currently, it works with 1 and 1. So I wanted to point out some of those measure combinations and where they currently work. This document just dropped, and so a great way to look at the way it might look in the technical guide for this coming year based on those current revisions. Oh. Achievement level descriptors.
Thank you, Stephen. For those of you new to DAAN, my name is Sarah Nitzos. I know it's been a while since I was introduced. Good morning. I just wanted to review the achievement level descriptors as they are new this year, and what is new and what is not new. So as you probably already know, all level 4 went from standard exceeded to advanced. 3 is standard met to proficient. Standard 2 nearly met to developing, and standard 1 not met to minimal. Simply a change in language, but it also affected the domain areas. The domain areas also got a rebrand. So above went to above proficient, near went to at or near proficient. That's a huge change, at or near. And then below is still below proficient. The important thing to message to people is that nothing changed except the words. The new labels better reflect that continuum of student learning, and the new ALDs do not impact our ability to compare data year to year, because it's still a 4, it's still a 3, it's still a 2, it's still a 1. The only change is the verbiage. There is a toolkit available. There is one website, and it has information for everyone, for families, for district, for administrators, for teachers, to your board. There's a one-stop shop toolkit that's got letters, slides, PowerPoints, everything you might need to help communicate this information. Oh, we didn't trust the process. There's also new achievement level descriptors that impact our interims. The ICAs, no changes. The ICAs still keep their descriptors of advanced, proficient, developing, and minimal, but the IABs, FIBs, CAST interims, and the LPAC IAs are changed. They're the above proficient, at or near proficient, and below proficient. Again, it's just verbiage. No real change in actually what's going on. All right, over to ELA and math.
All right. So vaguely following the sequence that was followed at AIM. One of the most exciting things, and exciting because when I look at assessment, I like easy sells, and I think this is an easy sell for instructional strategies. And on the screen is an image of a 2022 study by SBAC that underlies a field test that's going to be coming out for some of our sixth graders this coming year. The ELA argumentative writing performance task, and eighth graders taking the math performance task get to have choice. So in terms of easy sell, the guidance in this assessing the options by SBAC a study is pushing out through teachers in order to make a choice valuable for students in assessment. Choice in the classroom is important, is the guiding principle there. Also underlies a 2024 statewide project in Connecticut. So I like to see this choice. I know when I was taking the GRE, I took it twice. I took it once with an essay that I didn't have any clue on, did not perform as well as I thought I could, and then happenstance, second time I took the GRE, had a topic I liked, topic I was connected to. They're also talking about some localized topics based on student location when they're taking the assessment. I did a lot better in that context. So great potential for pushing out localization, interest-based instruction. In terms of the next topic at AAIM Science, we recall yesterday that our data, we got an email maybe about a week ago that said yesterday all of the data for the California alternate assessments in terms of the SSRs will be available to us. That's quite a distance from the time in which all the others dropped, and that was due to post-equating the data structure of the California alternate assessments. They've changed that data structure so that those SSRs can now be delivered earlier. I would expect them in the coming year to be more closely coincident with the other assessments.
For those of you who've done the cast for many, many years, we'll bring this up again at Wednesdays at 1 because this is important to note. That survey is gone. There was a survey smack dab in the middle of that cast assessment. So if this year you notice the students are finishing earlier, it's not because they rushed through the test. That survey has now been removed. So that will definitely impact your testing time. So we'll bring that back up when it gets closer to testing season. All right, let's talk about interim assessments and some formative assessment resources. There are some new interims. That's very exciting. We always love it when we have some new interim options. There are two new focused IBs for each grade level from grade 3 through 8 and then at high school for word meaning and language use. There are two for literary and informational text. So two new in that area. And there's also a replacement performance task for the high school, which is excellent because that high school one was a little dry. In math, there's a replacement performance task for 7th grade. Additionally, LPAC interims saw a pretty significant shift. So if you're giving LPAC interims, it's important to know that the part 2, so listening, speaking, reading, and writing all have a part 1 and a part 2. The part 2s are what received the change. They were released when everything opened back up on August 4th. So if you've already downloaded those resources, you're in great shape. But if you have them from a prior year, you were supposed to shred them. But if you didn't, make sure you shred them now because part 2 is all new.
And just a reminder to establish Tom's roles for your teachers, for your assessment people, early in the season, early in the year, in order for those to be available across the school year for teachers. The best role for Early in the year is the administrator only role in TOMS, especially for any teacher who won't be administering the California alternate for science, which also starts here in September 15th. So they have access to a wealth of tools, and some of those tools are described here in some of the links in the presentation. You're welcome to click through to those links.
All right, on to tools for teachers. There's some new updates for tools for teachers. This is just a grounding slide if you're not familiar with tools for teachers. Fascinating. There are 19 new resources for the LPAC task types. There's information on best practices, and also they're now designed to facilitate training. That's fascinating. All right, tools for teachers for the first time ever. You're going to see some resources in ELA and math for kinder through second grade. It's about time that kinder through second grade have some resources, so they're there. Additionally, there are some more ELA plans and math plans for third through high school. So bottom line, tools for teachers got some new resources, and kinder through second now has some stuff in there. They also embedded English learner strategies directly into those lesson plans. They used to reside on just a separate page that you could look at, and now they are woven throughout that lesson plan. They also have those language goals on each lesson. We also wanted to bring to your attention Atlas, an excellent resource to get science performance tasks. We're doing a lot of professional development around Atlas and how to best use it to support an inquiry-based model in your instruction. So on the topic of tools, we brought another guest presenter today. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome Mr. Jordan Berryhill, who will be talking to us about MetaMetrics.
Thank you, Sarah. How's everybody doing? I'm Jordan Berryhill. I'm Director of State Partnership at MetaMetrics. Do we have any former teachers in here? Yeah, I kind of feel like I'm at the end of a lesson and I've got like 30 minutes of content to fit into 5 minutes, right? So we're gonna breeze through this, but what I would love is if you guys have some time after, for those of you that are in person, if you want to stop by the table and talk to me, would love to share some of the resources we have here. So one of our main things at MetaMetrics is that we don't believe in needing more assessments, but getting more out of the assessments that are already being delivered. So we have a partnership with the state of California, and that's why students receive Lexile and quantile measures in grades 3 through 8 and 11, both the summative and interim assessments. And we also link with multiple other interim providers. So Lexile and quantile measures are something that are deeply embedded in the California education system. So the reason I'm here today is to just talk to you all about that connection, talk to you about the support that we can provide, and how you can use that assessment data to really help our educators inform instruction. So here are just a couple of examples of where those Lexile and quantile measures show up on score reports or in the reporting system. And if you had any questions about finding that information, we can definitely talk about that later. Hopefully you guys have seen that and are familiar with it. And just real quickly, just a level set, if you do or don't know about the Lexile and quantile frameworks, the whole goal of the frameworks is to place both students and content on the same scale. And so the goal is to most appropriately allow this data to drive the instruction of a student in their optimal growth position. So you can see in this example, we have a student at a 600L reading measure, and we want to try and place them in that sort of sweet spot of 50L above or 100L below to really challenge them in the way that's going to help them grow the most. On the quantile side, this is the equivalent with the math framework. And so we also have quantile measures for students and for content. In the state of California, you can actually, one of the tools that is on our hub that I'll show you a screenshot of in a little bit is actually connecting the California math standards to the quantile framework. And so you can see the quantile measure of the standards that an educator is teaching that week, and then look at the student data to think about the readiness of their students to learn that standard. So a couple of the ways that schools use Lexile and quantile measures. We talked about targeting instruction to students' abilities. and understanding sort of the need for additional challenge or scaffolding for specific students compared to the content of the lesson. Also promoting growth and progress monitoring of students. So again, you can see that those measures are reported for the summative, but also the interim, California summative and interim assessments, but also with those interim providers, you can continue to track monitoring of the Lexile and Quantile growth of students. And then to be able to communicate student achievement more effectively. So this is last one here is actually one that I wanted to highlight. We have lots of tools that I won't be able to show you guys today on our Lexile and Quantile Hub. All California educators through our partnership with the state get premium access to all of our tools on the Lexile and Quantile Hub. And so when they register, as long as they use their California email address, they automatically get that premium access. So there's some information here on the slides that you guys will have access to sort of remind your educators of those tools that are available to them. But I wanted to highlight a few of them that we're really excited about, a few newer tools that we have just launched. So this first one here is really to help our families interact with Lexile and Quantile measures. What do those measures mean? What do they tell me about my student? How can I support my student? So I was a former high school math teacher, and I think especially on the math side, it was always hard for parents to understand how they could support their students. What can I do with them at home over the summer or in the evenings after school? So this is a new resource that we have where students can actually take their Lexile and Quantile measure, or just a Lexile, just a Quantile measure, and it will build a plan for those students. So they just have to put in those measures and then their grade level, and then it tells them just a really brief description of what a Lexile measure is, what a Quantile measure is, to help them have that foundation of understanding of the measures. It also shows them where they stand nationally with our national Lexile and Quantile norms, which we just updated with some research this summer. And the sample sizes for that increased to about 20 million students across the nation, which we were excited to increase the sample size on for that research. And then the most exciting part, I think, is where it actually connects them to our Find a Book tool, which allows students to see what books are in my reading range, what are in my optimal reading range that are going to challenge me in a way that I'm going to continue to grow in my reading comprehension. And similarly, on the math side, where can I connect with resources? These are all open ed resources that students can connect with that are within their sweet spot quantile range. And then the second resource that we launched at the end of last year, I think is one that is really applicable to your role. And this is a district toolkit where we've sort of compiled all of our resources into one location. We've broken that into 3 buckets to really help schools and districts start to educate their educators on how to implement those measures. So it starts out with the framework fundamentals. What are the Lexile and Quantile frameworks? How do we put those measures into action? How can they inform our instruction, help us differentiate in the classroom? And then how do we communicate that growth with families, with colleagues, with other educators? So we tried to make this really self-serving in the sense that we have get started checklists in this toolkit, and then we have some YouTube video collections to break things down into smaller chunks. And so we really tried to make this something that you could take and run with in terms of trying to implement and inform your educators about these valuable resources in your district or school. So just a few quick takeaways that we talked about, right? Gauging the degree between the ability of the student and the difficulty of the text or the math concept. Accessing those free tools through the Lexile and Quantile Hub. We can look at that longitudinal growth of a student, especially if they've come from another school district or even another state, and then communicating more effectively with our families and communities. So I know that was a quick run through. I've got some additional resources here that we've got linked in the slide deck that would love for you guys to check out. But again, if you would stop by, if you're in the room or if you're online, feel free to reach out to me. All my contact information is there. I would love to talk to you more about how we can support your school and district.
Thank you so much, Jordan. It's always great to have another source for free resources that are already put together for us. So please reach out to Jordan. He answers his emails super quick. Give it up for Jordan. All right. I know. Raise your hand if you're already doing initial LPAC. You're already knee deep in it. Okay, hands down. Raise your hand if you're just going to get started. It's just kicking off soon. Okay, I'm feeling the hands online. Cowpads. Cowpad's upload definitely works into that. So I wanted to put it to everybody's attention that something that's great is you can reuse all the non-scannable materials that you got from last year for this year, which is awesome. We love being able to reduce, reuse, and recycle. LEAs may also reuse the initial alternative packets and the booklets and the picture cards. Those are all still usable this school year. If you've not done the LEA certification, you've got a big check mark next to you, but you can recertify by using last year's certification. But make sure your test examiners are annually trained. Annually trained. All right. LPAC resources at a glance. There's a brand new updated version. It's got lots of resources. We love a good infographic. We love everything all in one place. This is your guide. We also want to let you know there's a new supplemental resource. It does not replace the calibration that is required that you give to your test examiners, especially for scoring those speaking and reading. But it does give that overview. A lot of us do in-person meetings with our LPAC testers, and we want to make sure we're going over things. There's a brand new resource to help you with that. It's got really great slides, really great resources to borrow and use at your will. There's also an update to the OTAMs, the Online Test Administration Manual. So make sure you look at the LPAC and the alternative LPAC, as there's been a little bit of changes to them. They've elevated that hand scoring section so it makes a little bit more sense. And they relocated the using data interface for secondary scoring for the alternative. So just some things to put on your radar. There's also been an update to the LPAC information guide. I've listed all of the updates here, along with direct links to exactly those things. I wanted to elevate for you that there is clarification on the changes to the home language survey before testing, and then the correction process that may or may not need to take place after testing, because both Stephen and myself and Evan and Hillary and Anna in the room from the Moss unit constantly get these questions, and we wanted to let you know they did provide some clarification there for you. There's also a lot of information on the new domain exemptions and the time frame, so take a look at this as it's got some really good information. The summative and alternative LPAC in-test surveys, similar to getting rid of the CAST survey, the summative alternative LPAC will also be getting rid of its survey. So a reduction in testing time for all of our friends. Assembly Bill 2555. There is a reclassification bill that's coming up. It's undergoing some major changes. We get a lot of questions about this. We are just as excited as you are. It's going back for its third reading. So as soon as we get an update, you will hear about it. We are waiting with bated breath. I highly suggest that you click one of these links, go to the legislative scan, and get on their listserv so they will email you every time it changes if this is something you're interested in. But we'll keep you updated as well.
And Sarah, just to add that we're going to have our Moss team here in the next, I think our next meeting we'll have our special guest.
Moss is going to be a special guest at our next DAAN, and I'm sure this will be a pinnacle piece of their work. All right, let's talk a little bit about initial LPAC.
Thank you, Sarah. Actually, before I talk about that, I want to add something. 1067, SB 1067, it just passed this morning from in the Assembly and moved to the Senate. That's the math screener, that quick math screener that has been moving through the the legislative process. We periodically, as a county office of education, in supporting you, our local educational agencies in Los Angeles County, will get lists and lists of things that could need to be addressed. And one of those things is students who have not been tested over 30 days for the initial LPAC. Quite a low number right now, 52. Number of students who are eligible to test according to TBDs and TBDs and CalPads is over 10,000. Presumably, most of our districts have just started the school year. Some of you have a practice of doing summer testing, but as those students matriculate in your schools, 30 days is coming. They'll do another draw on the 3rd. Outreach starts when there are issues. I heard CalPads as something that's happening right now. Ever important to make sure students who are mids, who are not actually enrolled, are cleared in CalPads so that students don't linger as TBDs that don't actually go to your schools. Something that as a LEA coordinator, I would often hear from a school is the student doesn't go here, as I'm researching why a student hadn't tested yet. There are a lot of updates and changes. I'm just going to refer you back to AAIM for those updates and changes. And let you know that those are all enhancements based on things that you have suggested, the problems that you encounter, and go to ETS, go to CDE with suggestions for improvement do result in improvement. So always be sure to make your suggestions known. They matter. There are also in the AIM meeting a guidance on GED and HiSET, how that works. There's a roadshow every year. One of them is hosted by LACOE on GED and HiSET. So if you oversee GED and HiSET, high school equivalency, make sure you get to that in-person convening next year. I believe that has passed. It passed last week. NAEP, if you are testing with NAEP, you already know that, hopefully. You already got that email. Make sure that process is guided for them. It's essentially just plugging into that. Results should come out spring of 27, mapping study spring of 27 as well. That's the correlation between the state test and the NAEP. In terms of accessibility resources, we looked at some SPED questions. We won't go into detail here, but that matrix has been updated. We were all wildly anticipating the day that fidget spinners became a designated support. I know I saw somebody playing with the Rubik's Cube there during the last time I was talking. So know that is available. A lot of additional availability of things. Make sure that those are available to your students. For example, that tracing paper for the math assessments. There is a new process in LPAC domain exemption. There's a one sheet on how to do it. A link there on that one sheet for making sure you justify it. Upcoming training for ETS and CDE you can find on the upcoming on-demand trainings webpage. We want to highlight the fall charter school in-person convenings because it's a in-person event that has that reaches out to our charter friends. The LACOE one, the one hosted at LACOE, hosted by CDE, by I believe SCOE at LACOE, is September 28th. Make sure you have gotten yourself in the queue for that. California Assessment Conference, my colleague Sarah Nitsos and myself will have some presentations at that. We look forward to seeing you there. We always see many of you there at CAC. Last time it's going to be in Riverside, we understand, because the venue is not big enough. If you are interested in going to California Assessment Conference, buy your tickets now because they will sell out. We've been told 4 or 5 times already. Assessment catalog is live and available to invite you to upcoming professional learning offered by the assessment division of assessment department, including our collaboration with Matt and the special education division for accessibility supports for all the two-part series coming up here in September. And I'd like to hand it off to our friends from UDL to advertise this.
Thank you, Stephen. My name is Songhee Pak Okino, and I'm the project director for the Learning Acceleration and Academic Support Unit. And you can kind of think of us as everything UDL, right? Universal Design for Learning, which is all about proactively designing that learning and learning environment, taking into account the variability of our learners and key to strengthening our Tier 1 system. And so I just wanted to call your attention to an upcoming opportunity. It's called UDL in Action Fall Leadership Series. It is a no-cost opportunity for site teams, as well as district teams and solo educators to learn more about UDL, the skills, gain knowledge, and really strategies for effective UDL implementation, also taking a look at it from a system point of view. And so I'm going to go ahead and come by and share this flyer with you. This one shows you the UDL in Action Leadership Series. On the back side is the registration for it, and then the QR code takes us to our catalog. And when you go to the catalog, you'll see many, many offerings that are either no cost or low cost, and we also provide customized support. So I know that you're working super hard to get the outcomes that you want, and so if you're familiar with UDL, then you know that Universal Design for Learning is really about proactively designing the system to meet the needs of all of our students, especially at Tier 1, and then reserving Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports specifically for those students that truly, truly need that targeted support. So my contact information is also on this. If you want to engage in any type of thought partnership, or you know somebody in your organization who's looking for support with UDL, please feel free to pass on the information. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Evan.
Thank you, Songhee. I think that's a great way to wrap today's online version. If you're in person, want to stay. I want to just point out, what was the cost of that, Songhee? Zero
cost.
It's the new model for working with LACOE, no cost. It's the universal support model. We love it. Make sure, if you haven't already, I saw some of you jump to, because, getting 5s across the board, to make sure you fill out our August 2026 feedback form. We'll use that to improve our offerings. We have the next session is Tuesday, September 29th, but I think our Wednesdays at 1 Summer Fun continues on Wednesdays at 1. Eponymous offering. Thank you. I taught English. Anyway, so yeah, the next meeting on September 29th. And for those of you who are online, we will, like I said, circle back, because during the extension activity, we're going to have Matt come back up here, and we're going to actually dig into that data around autism, and he's going to tell you why. That's the thing he left out there, is the big wondering, like, why is this increase? Matt is going to explain it. No pressure. He's going to explain the why. But anyway, thank you so much. I want to say goodbye. Thank you to everybody who's online. You might have missed it earlier when Stephen almost fell over the top of the camera. It was great. We're going to turn it into a meme. And this is our whole crew. We love having you back for another year, and we look forward to working with you throughout the year. Thanks for if you're online. And for those of you who are here, we hope you can stick around. We'll take a 5-minute break and come back in just a little bit, and we'll dive into the special ed data.